Well, I am honored to be here. I really want to thank very much SBFR for this wonderful opportunity to visit with you all, and for the gracious hospitality that the Vice Chancellor and the Dean and all of you have provided to my colleague, Wallace, and myself. It is truly a great honor to be here and a pleasure to be with all of you. So we're going to talk about the other human cell. And you might ask, why would we want to be interested in the other human cell? And I'm going to argue that if we don't understand this other human cell, then we cannot really understand all the complex diseases that are the major threats to global population right now. And what are those diseases? Well, they're the neuropsychiatric diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, autism, etc., bipolar, schizophrenia. There are also, though, the cardiovascular diseases that affect the heart, cardiovascular disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, or the visceral diseases, such as would affect, all right. We're not going to the meeting yet. Visceral diseases, such as those that affect the kidney, the heart, or the immunological system, or the metabolic diseases, diabetes, obesity, generally metabolic syndrome, or cancer and aging. What is really discouraging in the biomedical arena is the global community is spending literally the equivalent of trillions of dollars to understand these diseases. Yet with all the effort that we've all put into it, all the money that we've invested, we've really not effectively eliminated any one of these diseases, or even really materially able to treat them in an effective way. So that's really a surprise, because you would think with all the resources that have been invested, we should have been able to do better. So then the question is, well, why didn't we do better? Again, it isn't that we haven't put enough time, it isn't that we haven't put enough money. There must be something else wrong. And there was a philosopher of science named Thomas Kuhn, and he argued that when science invests more and more resources in trying to solve a problem, and they get progressively less success in achieving that answer, then what is often the problem is not the effort, but the basic assumptions on which they're addressing that problem. We call these assumptions paradigms. And so then the question is, if a paradigm problem is the problem we're confronted, then the first question is, what are the paradigms that we're using to investigate these diseases, and what might be wrong with them? So we argue in our group that there are two fundamental paradigms that we have used to address these problems. So they go back to basic instruction and visions that were occurring in Western Europe almost a half a millennia ago. One was a fellow named Vesalius, and he was the first person to really begin to systematize the anatomy of the human body. He basically made such a transformative effect by analyzing the human body that all subsequent physicians came to specialize in different parts of the body. And that's gone on now for the last 500 years. So today we have ophthalmologists, neurologists, nephrologists, cardiologists, dermatologists, and all of those people then study an organ-specific disease. So that has led to the idea that if you have a symptom in an organ, then the disease is caused by that organ, a defect in that organ. That's what we call the anatomical paradigm of disease. So if I get a headache then, and my primary care physician can't help me, then he would send me to the neurologist, who would look at my head and think, oh, well, there's something wrong with your neurons. But the other major paradigm is one that's much more recent. That goes back to a guy named Mendel, and he began to study pea plants, but a very small subset of the inheritance pattern genes of the pea plants followed inheritance that he proposed had two copies of that phenomenon, that genetic component in each individual. One went to each gamete, and they came back together in the next individual, and we call that the Mendelian inheritance of genetics. Now, the Mendelian inheritance in genetics then led to another corollary, and that is, if something is inherited according to laws of Mendel, it's genetic, but if it isn't, then it must be environmental. So those two ideas underlie most of the research that's done in biomedical research to answer these questions. But It is true that all the anatomical genes are located in the chromosomes, and the chromosomes are in the nucleus, and those chromosomal genes are inherited according to laws of Mendel. So as long as you're studying anatomical traits, they will Mendelize. But in fact, most of these diseases, when you look at their inheritance pattern, they don't follow a classic Mendelian inheritance. But they're clearly transmitted through families. So there's something wrong with that paradigm. And so what we argued is that to be alive, you not only need anatomy, what you see in the mirror, but you also need what animates you, that is energy. And another scientist half a millennia ago named Newton argued that mass doesn't move unless it's acted on by energy. And since you're the most animated thing in the environment, then clearly energy must be central to everything that you do. So we argued that maybe by just studying anatomy, we were missing half of the major conceptual framework that we needed to understand human health and disease, and that we should then also study energy. So to be alive, you need anatomy, energy, you need information for anatomy, which is in the chromosomes and nuclear, but you also need information for energy. And I'm going to argue that the most important energy genes are not in the chromosomes, and they are not inherited according to the laws of Mendel, and that has been a major oversight in our trying to understand the inheritance of these diseases. So I'm going to argue that it's defects in bioenergetics and non-Mendelian inherited genes that are the missing understanding and link to understanding the common diseases. And once we address these ideas, I do believe we have the opportunity to understand and ultimately cure these diseases. Children's Hospital of Philadelphia is going to completely ruin this lecture. That is problematic. I hope it doesn't shut me down. Okay. This is our problem. Oh gosh. Do you have another computer? There is going to be a slight pause because my institution decided it didn't want me to give this lecture. Moving right along, how did this dichotomy come about? Well, it actually came about by a symbiosis that occurred 2.5 billion years ago, when two different life forms came together. One was an archaeobacteria, the other was an oxidative bacteria, and they form a symbiosis. And that symbiosis then ultimately gave rise to what we call the eukaryotic cell. Now, this event occurred one and only one time. So if that event did not occur, then there would be no higher plants and animals on this planet. So that was a really important and unique event. So what? Okay. That is not helping. What have we got?